Ever since the end of the Zou arc, a certain statement from Robo-Noa Zoro has had people speculating Zoro potentially leading the Samurai of Wano. And as the Wano arc proceeded, a lot of fans started to lose faith in this idea, given his lack of interaction with some of the samurai and his lack of leadership moments overall. And of course what I mean by samurai is not just regular fodder samurai. I mean Oden's retainers, the Red Scabbards. What is going on, everybody? Jagan here, and we're back with another One Piece discussion video. And if you're a fan of the Grandmaster Zoro and just these One Piece discussions overall, I'd really appreciate if you consider subbing to the channel, dropping a like and comment. Each and every one of them means a lot. And if you're also wondering where my review for chapter 991 is, I am currently working on it. The fan scans that dropped this time were a little bit sketchy. I didn't feel like I could properly articulate a chapter review, so I waited for the official translations to do so. But anyway, the point of this video isn't really to go into depth on Zoro vs Kaido. I literally just dropped a discussion video with Fiji on that, so check that out if you'd like. The link will be in the description. And of course, a lot of the events that I will be talking about will lead into Zoro vs Kaido, but the main purpose, the main focus of this video is going to be talking about when a perfect moment for Zoro to showcase leadership is, which I consider to be a very core characteristic of his. We all know about his lofty ambitions, trying to become the world's strongest swordsman. We know that he's the right-hand man to Luffy and often a main pillar of support, someone who will step up and even check Luffy if necessary. But I believe Oda is setting us up for something huge in the Wano arc. I believe that this lack of focus on this aspect of his character so far in the post-time skip isn't for no reason. I think Oda is just waiting for the perfect moment to showcase that Zoro is truly a conqueror, someone who has the disposition to stand above others. And in order for him to continue to get development in this department, I believe that he will lead the Red Scabbards in battle, that he will earn all of their respect at some point, and that he'll also showcase Conqueror's Haki just like Oden, likely at a very crucial time in the arc. So there's a lot of parallels in the Wano arc that can often easily be overlooked when it comes to Zoro, especially considering his Act 2 plotline and how similar it actually is to Oden flashback, to the events of the Oden flashback. But the first thing you think about when you think of the similarities between Oden and Zoro is of course the fact that they are both monster swordsmen, right? They are both extremely strong swordsmen. They are both described as having beast-like qualities when fighting. And I think the thing that people have looked at the most when comparing these two characters is the events of Thriller Bark and then the end of the Oden flashback, the events that went down very similar. Two characters who were ready to take on all the punishment for others, who negotiated with the opposition and carried out a ridiculous trial. These are guys who you consider real men, alphas to be exact. And upon Ashura Doji's introduction when he was still Shuten Maru, that's exactly what he described as somebody who's worth leading. He wants to follow somebody who's a real man, somebody who exhibits these alpha qualities, and of course is a beast-like fighter with the swords. That's the kind of person he's looking for. But as we know, he was still convinced to join the alliance anyway. He's ready to put his life down and avenge Oden. But that doesn't change the fact that he still never found this leader, another samurai to give them hope and lead them on the front lines. Of course they trust Luffy and his whole alliance, but I still believe that he needs to see it firsthand. He needs to see a samurai worthy of inheriting Oden's will firsthand, someone who's also a conqueror like Oden, somebody who of course tamed Oden's sword, has been using Enma effectively, but he still hasn't truly demonstrated this in battle. And I think that's what's going to win over Ashura Doji eventually, which I'll elaborate on a little bit more in the latter half of the video. But back to the Act 2 plotline with Zoro. And I think the interactions he's had, especially when it comes to his daughter Hiyori, are almost too similar to ignore. Zoro met Hiyori at the age of 26. That's the exact age that Oden met Toki. Zoro protected Hiyori from Killer, aka Kamazo the Manslayer. He then took some damage, passed out, and was nursed back to health by Hiyori. The same exact thing happened to Oden after the attempted trials to get onto Whitebeard's ship. He saved Toki from pirates, passed out, and was nursed back to health by her. Hiyori and Toki also have a very similar scene dealing with some of the cruel events of the Wano country. Hiyori cries and confides in Zoro because of the effects the smiley fruits are having on the people of Wano. Toki cries and confides in Oden because of the injury she received, as well as a result of all the cruel things Orochi has been doing to the people of Wano while Oden was away. This event results in a very similar action from both Zoro and Oden. Zoro attacks Orochi directly and is then stopped by Kuroshiro, aka Denjiro. Oden also attacks Orochi, but is stopped by the Barrier no Mi. So there's a clear pattern being established here. Zoro's Wano plotline having very similar actions to some of the events of Oden in his flashback. So what else is needed to happen now? What did Oden do after he failed to strike down Orochi? He went for Kaido, knowing it's the only way to save Wano, which is reiterated by Shinobu a couple chapters ago, talking about Oden's reasoning for striking down Kaido. And multiple times now, it's also been brought up by Zoro that he is focused on Kaido, that that's his main objective right now. So if this pattern continues, what is next for Zoro? Well, shortly after the events of Zoro and Orochi, we know that he obtained Enma, emphasized to be the only sword to wound Kaido, and it's also Oden's sword, specifically highlighting inherited will. And real quick, I just want to say, I know some people have been kind of, I guess, downplaying Enma's significance due to the Scabbards actually hurting Kaido in the latest couple chapters, but remember, when they say the only sword to wound Kaido, they mean seriously wound. Like what the Scabbards did is just chump change, man. Those are just paper cuts. Oden with Enma is the only thing to really permanently injure Kaido, leave a permanent scar on Kaido. That is his most significant wound ever. So it's hard to discredit that from Enma, especially knowing that we know Kaido has lost multiple times as a pirate. He's been defeated 8 times, he's been captured even more times. So what Oden did with that sword is still legendary. For a character who's portrayed as not being able to die, this feat is not something to underestimate. So I think just like Oden did on the night 20 years ago, Zoro will be the one to lead the samurai, but he still hasn't showcased or really proven himself yet to all of the Red Scabbards. Nor do I think that there's been a correct time yet for Zoro to be put in a position of leadership or show his true power to them. I think there's a reason why that aspect of his character has been kind of ignored in Wano. A lot of his plotline has kind of been wandering off by himself, doing his own thing. And he even mentions to Hiyori that sometimes too many captains trying to steer the ship can just cause more problems. For a guy who pre-time skip has stepped up in so many times of crisis, he hasn't really showcased it all that much in the post-time skip, and especially not in Wano. So I definitely think big moments of leadership are coming for Zoro. And I think in these big moments, he's going to showcase Conqueror's Haki. And if you're actually not convinced of Zoro having Conqueror's Haki, I've got 2 pretty solid videos to link you. One is Mr. Moorish. He breaks down why it's so important for Zoro's character to have Conqueror's Haki. And then another is my friend Dice Sage, who speculates that Enma was actually tamed through Conqueror's Haki. So definitely give those videos a watch. The links will be in the description. So now we're going to get into some speculation on when this moment can possibly occur, and how exactly he can earn the respect of these Scabbards, because clearly just taming Enma was not enough to do so. So first, let's talk individually on his interactions with the Scabbards so far. I think it's safe to say he's earned a lot of Kinemon's respect. Obviously, they didn't get off to the best start because Kinemon noticed that Zoro had Shusui, which is obviously a national treasure of Wano, and thought, like, why does this random bum have frickin' Shusui? You know, like, it makes sense why he would react this way. But then given the events of Dressrosa, when he saw how powerful Zoro was against Pika, and then eventually in Wano when he realized that Zoro actually tamed Enma, when he even stated himself that if it were I would not accept that sword. But Zoro did it anyway. So I definitely think Kinemon is someone who's pretty close to the point where he would accept Zoro or follow Zoro in battle. Kawamatsu, in my opinion, is one of the upper tier Scabbards in strength, maybe mid to upper tier, and I think he's also one of the only Scabbards who has started to respect Zoro already, given he's had more interaction time with him. He seemed pretty surprised that Zoro could block his attack pretty effortlessly, and then also, he was one of the few Scabbards who actually showed a reaction to Zoro taming Enma, saying, "I can't believe this fellow." So he seems pretty impressed with Zoro's abilities overall, and I don't think he's that far away already from being willing to fight alongside Zoro and maybe even follow him. So heading back to Ashura Doji, who I kind of talked about a little earlier in the video, he was the one who said that there's no real men left, nobody worthy of leading the samurai. And he was also the Scabbard who confirmed Oden's usage of Conqueror's Haki, calling it his special trick. So maybe Zoro's usage of Conqueror's Haki in front of Ashura Doji will be one of the factors that makes him follow him. Because he even saw Zoro tame Enma. He was there when Zoro was taming Enma, but there was next to no interaction between them, almost as if he was unimpressed. Which pretty much makes sense because Ashura Doji is a very strong guy. A lot of these Scabbards have honestly been underrated when it comes to power scaling. Ashura Doji had a pretty good showing against Jack. He didn't really consider any of Kaido's subordinates to be real threats. He only considered Kaido himself to be one. And Ashura Doji has always been more of a show me, don't tell me kind of guy. All the way back in the flashback, you remember he had heard of Oden's reputation, but he didn't care of anything of it. He didn't start following Oden until they actually had their battle in person, not until Oden whipped him. So it makes sense Ashura Doji wouldn't be inclined to follow another samurai until he can actually see the full extent to their combat prowess. So moving on to Dendro, and he's probably the guy I consider to be the actual strongest Scabbard. Upon his arrival to the raid on Onigashima when he brought his ships over, Ashura Doji called him a demon with the blade. That's a hell of a lot more respect he gave to Kaido's calamities. And remember, at this point, Ashura didn't even know he was an ally. He thought he was an enemy. So that's some genuine praise right there. We also know that Kuroshiro and Zoro had a minor clash at the capital, to where he was able to hold off and enrage two-sword style Zoro fairly easily. So there haven't been a whole lot of interactions between these two, but I still think based on Kiroshiro's combat prowess that it would take a hell of a lot for Zoro to prove his worth to them. I pretty much have the same criteria for Inuarashi and Nekomamushi. Obviously they've had a little more interactions given the events of Zou, but he still hasn't really had the opportunity to show his full combat prowess to them. I think anything that impresses Kiroshiro or Ashura Doji will likely do the same thing for Inuarashi and Nekomamushi. The same thing goes for Izo. And then of course, Okiku actually had some solid interactions with Zoro earlier in Act 1. So I think it's the same thing as the guys I mentioned earlier. Also throw Raizo in there. I could definitely see them all following Zoro very soon. But now it's time to talk about specifically what that could be. Could it be some information in action like I mentioned earlier of Zoro showing off his combat prowess, showing off Conqueror's Haki perhaps, maybe a great feat against Kaido? But here are the possible scenarios that I thought of. So the first one I'm going to bring to you guys is just the idea of fleshing out Zoro's past. Obviously there's been a ton of speculation regarding Zoro's connection to the Shimotsuki clan, the ties with Kuina and her father, all the way back to the village that Zoro grew up in, the similarities to Ryuma, how he looks very similar to Shimotsuki Ushimaru who was introduced in Act 2, and most importantly, and honestly the funniest reason, and that's because Oda damn near already spoiled this in an SBS, basically hinting at Zoro's lineage and likely to expand upon it further at a different time. And at this point, given the current circumstances, it's kind of hard to imagine a scenario in which his past gets fleshed out because obviously we're in the midst of war. But if the Scabbards were to somehow come across this knowledge, if they learn Zoro is actually the son of a former daimyo from a clan known for their hardiness, they are a very resilient clan, maybe actually knowing Zoro is a homegrown Wano samurai and not actually an outsider will give them the confidence that he is the one that they need to follow in battle, and that this would make him a lot more worthy to inherit Oden's sword. And Kawamatsu ironically calls Zoro a samurai from who knows where in Act 2, kinda emphasizing that he doesn't think he's worthy to inherit the sword at first because he's an outsider, right? But I think it's very plausible to say that their perception of him would change if they found out he's from Wano, especially if they found out he's from a very renowned clan in Wano. Another scenario I thought of that's likely going to happen regardless if it has anything to do with the Scabbards or not is the idea of Zoro fighting against King. If Zoro can prove himself to be the strongest swordsman on Wano, defeating presumably the strongest swordsman that the antagonistic force has, that might earn some of their respect. Specifically characters like I mentioned earlier, like Ashura Doji, who value strength and masculinity. So there's definitely some combat feats that are going to happen, but I don't know if fighting King is one of them. I also think it's possible that in a moment where the Scabbards are defeated, Zoro shows up against Kaido and replicates an amazing feat. Maybe he cuts fire the same way Kinemon just did. Maybe he uses Conqueror's Haki against Kaido and they have a Conqueror's Clash. Maybe if Ashura Doji sees Zoro use quote-unquote Oden's special trick right in front of him, he'll want to follow this guy. Let's take what I just said about Zoro cutting fire a step further. Maybe Kinemon dies in this battle. The Scabbards are obviously in a tough situation right now where they're all facing Kaido without a true leader. And Kinemon has been this kind of acting leader, right? I know he's technically the leader, but it's obvious it's not even close to the same thing as Oden, right? The Scabbards need a samurai to look at as hope, not a contemporary, but someone to truly follow and acknowledge the same way they did for Oden. So I definitely see a scenario in which Zoro shows up to the battlefield after Kinemon potentially dies. He replicates the feat of cutting fire just like Kinemon, using Oden's sword with effectiveness, possibly unlocking Conqueror's Haki in front of all the Scabbards. Obviously it's impossible to predict how the plot's going to play out with 100% accuracy, right? But I definitely believe a lot of these potential scenarios I listed are very plausible. I don't believe all the parallels and similar traits Zoro has to Oden are for no reason. I don't believe Oda would emphasize inherited will with Enma for no reason. And I don't believe Zoro has been sidelined for such a long time for no reason. I truly believe these great moments of combat and leadership that we are so accustomed to will be prominent once again. The last dialogue Zoro had before entering the Wano arc will come full circle and lead us to some of his best moments in the series. And that's going to do it for me, guys. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I'd also really appreciate if you'd like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, I'd appreciate sharing the video with your friends or mutuals if some of them are still uncertain of Zoro's role in the Wano arc. I'm Dragon, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.